Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the And Whatnot podcast. I hope you all enjoyed episode 1. I know I sure did after I finally got used to hearing my own voice.
Yeah, it does take a little bit getting used to it. Like, I obviously got used to it a lot faster than you did, because I'm the one that was doing all the editing, so I listened to it like 4 times, so...
I finally listened to it the day that we're recording this one. I was like, okay, I gotta do it. I gotta do it. So I turned it on, and after recoiling in horror for a good minute, I relaxed and eased into it, and it just became the stranger who just tells me everything I agree with. I'm like, you know what? This girl's got some good ideas.
And then in the other side of your head, you're saying, and that guy, he's an idiot.
No, I still hear your voice because I'm used to talking to you, but it's like me, I'm
Yeah.
a stranger.
Yeah, it does take some getting used to, but like I said, after a little while, that's normal. So,
Exactly. So I guess we will start with some feedback and thoughts about the first episode. If anyone would like to submit feedback, we do have our Twitter handle at underscore and whatnot. It's very confusing. And we have our own personal Twitters, which I will not try to recite on air because mine is a joke and yours isn't even descriptive of who you are.
no. We also just have the podcast email, if you prefer to email us. It's andwhatnotpodcasting@gmail.com.
And that ing is very important, as apparently and whatnot podcast was taken.
Yeah. There was another podcast that had 2 or 3 episodes back in 2013 that had a similar name, and I'm guessing
It was called the whatnot, not the and. We have the and. It makes us very special.
Yeah, I guess.
And in case anyone didn't pick up on it the last time, I think there was one instance. The reason it's called the And Whatnot podcast is that seems to be Adam's catchphrase. Whenever I'm talking to him, I cannot have even a 5-minute stretch of conversation where he doesn't say and whatnot. So I joked we were having a hard time coming up with a title. I'm like, we should just call it and whatnot because it'll be a drinking game. They'll have to take a shot every time you say it. And so far you've been disappointing. You've only said it the one time. You're guarded.
To be fair, I did also say it 10 minutes into the first episode, because I remember as I was going through the editing, I made a special note where I said it. And I think it was 14 minutes into the recording, so that was about 9-10 minutes into what ended up being the actual episode.
Well, if you eventually get out of hand, you will have to cut a few out so we don't get implicated in anyone's alcohol poisoning.
I don't
'Cause
say
trust
it
me,
that much. I know I say it a fair bit, but not that much.
There'll be times where it's just you and I talking in real life, not on the podcast, and you'll say maybe not and whatnot, but sometimes it's something else whatnot. You'll say whatnot 20 times.
Yeah.
And you don't believe me, but it's one of those things you're gonna have to just record yourself and play it back.
Yeah. I don't know.
So the one bit of feedback that we did get was from our lovely mother, who does not know anything about the internet. And her question was, what is a podcast? Can I watch you while you guys do it? It sounds like fun. And Mom, a podcast is basically like a radio show. And no, you can't watch it because you will only be watching one of us as we record over Skype. And we'll just be talking into nothing.
Yeah. When we were recording the first episode, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go record it. And she's like, oh, can I watch? I was like, there's nothing to watch. It's me talking at my computer. And she's like, oh. All deflated, because she's like, I'm gonna be in on this. It's gonna be fun. No.
Maybe if we had decided to do the video chat, at least to each other, but that's just weird. That's too much.
Yeah, I think that'd be a little odd. Because we had also, discussed recording it in person, sometime when you're in town. But again, I think that would be a little odd as well, because it would be we're just having a normal conversation, but not at the same time. This, although it is very conversational, it has a point to it, whereas usually when we're together, we're just gabbing at each other about whatever.
Yeah. And it'll probably end up being no one will understand what we're saying simply because we just talk over each other too much. Here we have to be measured and use our speaking voices, you know.
Yeah, I found that when editing the first episode, for about the first 15 minutes or so, there was some of us talking over each other, but then eventually we just got into whenever someone else starts talking, the other person just stays completely quiet, maybe adding that sort of thing. But as we got on, there was no talking over each other. Made editing
we learned
a lot
to take
easier.
turns.
Yeah.
Oh, I just ruined it.
Yeah, you did. Edit that bit out.
So how was the editing?
It took me a lot longer than I was expecting. I was expecting to just take as long as it would to listen to it, but editing the first half hour of audio actually took me about 2 hours. Now, some of that time was me getting used to the editing program as well, so it'd be like, oh, I want to change this one thing, and then spend 5 minutes fiddling about with that. Or, oh, how do I do this such and such thing? And another 5 minutes of fiddling with that. So as it went on, it got faster, because I already had all my keyboard shortcuts set up, so I just had to hit Control-R to do this, and then Control-U to do that, and stuff like that.
And that's why I let you do the editing, because I knew it would be finicky and way longer than you expect, and I don't have time for that. You have time for that. So this week's adventure, we went and saw Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. So we had our own little movie date, and my husband did not accompany us, as he said, quote, Harry Potter is for nerds.
And yet he is the one that's completely into comics and everything, which some people would find a lot more nerdy than Harry Potter, which is extremely mainstream.
You know, to each their own when it comes to nerdiness. So he has his thing, I have mine. I'm not even that big of a Harry Potter person. I mean, I was at the perfect age for it. I was about 10 when the first book came out. We actually read it in my grade 5 class in school. So I was prime audience for it. I was like, I'm going to go to the wizard school. I was so excited. I'm going to get an owl, and I'm going to be magical, and it's going to be great.
And then a year later, all your dreams were crushed.
Yes, pretty much. No owl post for me, unfortunately. But what can you do? That is my life. And so I feel like I was the perfect age for Harry Potter when it came out. So you would have been too young, really. Do you feel like you missed that trend?
I don't know, because it was still really popular when I got to that age as well. I never really got into Harry Potter as much as you did. You've read all the books 3 or 4 times at least. Every time a new one would come out, you'd read every one up to that one. So the first one you've read, 12 billion times or something like that.
Well, since there's not 12 billion books.
You know what I mean. Being a little hyperbolic, but I never really read them. I read 1, 2, and 3, and then 5. And those are the ones that I've read. And I only read the 5th one because we were on vacation, and I ran out of things to read, and you had that. I was like, might as well.
So you missed a whole chunk of the story. You just picked up and you're like, whatever.
Pretty much. They're decent books, I guess. I just never really got into them like some people did.
That's fair. And I guess that is the thing, I was at the beginning, but you're right, it continued for years, and, tons of people were coming into the age where it was appropriate as the books came out. And so it was funny, how you mentioned, every time I got a new book or a new one was coming out, I would reread all the others. So I've read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, not the Sorcerer's Stone. Screw you, America. And I've read that one 9 times now. So many times. Was it 7 books? I should have looked this up.
Yes.
But, I've read it probably 10 times because I would also read it again just for fun, not when another one was coming out. But the first one is so ingrained in my memory. And then the last one, I only read once because nothing else came out after it. Mm-hmm. So when I saw Deathly Hallows, the movie, and especially part 2, and of splitting movies into 2, anyway, but when I saw the second part, I'm like, what? What's happening? He dies? what? Because I've only read it once. I'm like, this can't be in the book. And it's just because I didn't remember it. And so it was kind of funny seeing the last movie, and it actually surprised me. And you liked other like young adult books, though. I remember you having different series other than Harry Potter that you were into.
Yeah, one series that I got into and read, I think probably 6 or 7 of the books, like it's a really long series, was the Pendragon series by DJ Hale. And I got into it because one time we had gone to Owen Sound for shopping or something, and we went to the bookstore there, and the first book was like 99 cents. Obviously, it was so that you'd buy that one and then buy the rest of them. And I think I got like the first 3 books or something and read them, and they were pretty good. So I ended up getting the rest of them for like various birthday and Christmas presents and stuff like that. So I was into that series. It was pretty good. After about the 6th or 7th book, I kind of lost interest in them and didn't read them anymore. I also read 4 of the Chronicles of Narnia, because Dad got me that like box set for Christmas one time, and they were all right. I wasn't really into series. Like, I'd get individual books and enjoy them, but as for series, those are the only ones I really read.
Mm-hmm. And it's so funny because, I mean, Harry Potter was like huge, and still pretty much is a huge phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it seems like every other sort of young adult series is trying to catch that same lightning in a bottle, you know? And I guess you can't really pinpoint, what would make Harry Potter so successful, but another series like the Pendragon books, because I read a couple too since you had them lying around the house, and they were decent. And it's like, what would make one so much better than the other really catch fire? Like, unlike, I guess, maybe like Catching Fire from the Hunger Games.
I think with Harry Potter was that it started out as a children's book and evolved with the characters, whereas with some series, they might be about children, aimed at children, but then throughout the series stay with that demographic. Like, they don't evolve with their readership. So, like, in Harry Potter, the themes get darker, it gets deeper, like that. Whereas with some, it's just, these are going to be young adult books, and it goes on for 10 years, but then the people that started reading it are now 10 years older, but it's still aimed at young adults.
Yeah. So with Harry Potter, definitely lots of people have looked at the themes and the messages, and I even saw this news story with the latest American election that people who are really into Harry Potter are like less likely to vote for Donald Trump and stuff like that. Well, look how that turned out. But if only it were as popular as we think it is, like, I guess. But I do agree that it ages with you. Just like a good band or something will change over time, the books will change over time as well.
Mm-hmm. Although, that being said, there are some books that when I read when I was younger, I still reread. Like, one book, it's called The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, and I've probably read that 10 or so times, and it's definitely like a young adult book, but it's also pretty dark, because it's about a little girl growing up in Nazi Germany, and so it's definitely written that young adults will get everything that's being said, but then as you grow older, you kind of just see more of the darkness, kind of. So I think any adult would be able to pick it up and just enjoy it as well. I love that book, but the movie for it, awful.
I was just going to say, I remember you coming, and I believe I texted you and said, how'd you like the movie? Like, I know you love that book, and you were like, oh, God.
The thing is, the way that I described it was disappointingly average. Like, if it was a standalone thing, and I had never read the book, movie would be fine. But having read the book, I'm just like, no, what are you doing? Don't even get me started. Okay, I'm gonna get started.
That's apparently another episode.
But one, like, key thing they cut out of the movie, and I'm just like, what? This is the important bit. How is that not in the movie? The thing is, the family like hides a Jew, and the little girl and the Jew become really good friends. She's learning to read, so he writes her a book. But because of rations and whatnot, there's not like paper and whatever, and so they can't be seen like bringing all this in because they're like, "What are you doing with all this stuff?" So what the Jew does is paints over pages from Mein Kampf and writes his own book about him in a boxing match with Hitler and winning, because when he was young he used to box. And it's a very important bit to the story that's not in the movie at all. And I'm just like, how do you cut that bit out? There's so much they did cut out, but that one bit, I'm just like, that's an important bit. The rest of it, yeah, cut whatever you want, but that's gotta be in it.
And it seems like that would be a fairly easy thing to keep in. Like, it wouldn't take up a lot of screen time when you're cutting for time or something.
Well, the thing is, like, the book takes place over, I want to say, like, 5 years, something like that. So you see this little girl grow up into essentially a young adult. But in the movie, you don't get any sense of time passing because you don't see her grow up at all. She looks the exact same at the end as she does at the beginning. So you don't get that. You're like, okay, is this 1 month? Is this a year? How long has this taken place? Because there's no sense of time at all. And it just makes the movie seem really odd.
And that's always the hard part with adapting a book or a series of books into movies. And I mean, every time you do that, there's going to be some criticism of, oh, you left out something, oh, this was important, or you changed whatever. And I think on the whole, I think the Harry Potter movies did really well with it. It's a lot of source material. And, you know, even J.K. Rowling continues to write things. She's expanding the universe as we, you know, are a decade out from even the last book being published. And I think it's a great feat about how much they were able to put into the movies. And I think my least favorite Harry Potter movie, granted I haven't watched them in a while, that was not part of this week's homework, but I remember not liking number 3, The Prisoner of Azkaban. And I always thought it was funny because that's the one that sort of critics liked the most. And apparently it had like better pacing and like it was a different director and all that stuff for that movie. But as a kid, I hated it. I hated the werewolf design, all that kind of stuff. Now, I have rewatched it since in a better light, but I still remember it being my least favorite.
I'm not sure, like, luckily this week we didn't have to make lists of movies, but I don't know what my rating list for Harry Potter would be. I guess, like, without actually having to think about it, they're all kind of just equal in my opinion, because having not really read the books, I don't have a favorite book, so I don't have a favorite movie. They're all just, yeah, they're good movies, and I'd give them all a solid 4 out of 5 type deal. Like, there isn't one that's bad, in my opinion, and there's not one that's, like, that stands out above the rest.
And yeah, like, I almost don't even consider them different movies, you know? Like, they're all telling the same story. It's a continuous story. It's not like, you know, the MCU, which we talked about last time, where the first one's about Iron Man, then the next one's about Thor, and then the next one's about whoever, and, like, they're different things.
Yeah.
Whereas the Harry Potter movies, they're telling one story over, you know, 8 movies. So you don't really need to worry about one necessarily being better, or even the books. I don't know if I could say whether a certain book is better than the other. I mean, if I had to pick, like, what comes to my mind right now is I really enjoyed Goblet of Fire. I really liked the Triwizard Tournament and kind of the actual return of Voldemort and that kind of stuff. But they're all telling the same story. So I kind of think them as one entity just broken into chunks.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, so I guess now we will move on to the movie at hand. So Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and how it fits in with the Harry Potter universe so far. So I guess I'll start off with the basic plot summary of the movie. So it's currently the 1920s, which is set well before the events of Harry Potter. For those who know, Harry Potter is actually set in the 1980s. And our main protagonist this time is named Newt Scamander. And for those who are familiar with the Harry Potter books, Newt wrote one of their textbooks called Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. So we are following Newt after he's come back from some travels. He's met some creatures, he's collected them, and he's keeping them in his magical briefcase. Because, much like, say, the TARDIS, it's bigger on the inside. And Newt is traveling to New York City. He says to acquire a new fantastic beast, but we soon learn that to be untrue. But he's traveling to New York with these illegally obtained creatures, and the Ministry of Magic in the United States, which is actually called the Magical Congress of the United States of America, is pretty much locked down for all magical beasts. They think that, there's all this destruction around the city and it's being caused by these magical creatures, which we will find out that maybe it isn't. But Newt's sort of innocent creatures end up escaping, so he has to run around the city and try to catch them before, they get hurt or he gets caught by the ministry. He meets some new friends, which are brand new characters. They don't exist in the Harry Potter universe so far. So we have Jacob, who's a muggle, or, they have a new word for it. We'll come back to that. But Jacob, who has no magical powers, and he meets a worker from the ministry named Tina, former Auror, and we'll sort of learn why she was demoted and what's going on with her. And we also meet her sister, Queenie, who is basically a mind reader. And so the four of them sort of go on this adventure. They have to catch all the escaped creatures and find out what other sinister happenings are going on around New York City. I think that's pretty good so far. So since you aren't super into Harry Potter, like not as much as I am, how do you feel it was sort of on a casual, like, movie-going glance?
I liked it. Not knowing anything about it going into the movie, just like with Doctor Strange, I didn't really see any of the trailers or read anything online. I liked it. It was easy to get into. It was easy to follow what was going on. But one thing that I didn't like, which kind of ties into the 3D aspect as well, is that they had some of the backstory stuff at the beginning on newspaper things that were like flying at the screen, and my eyes did not like the 3D effects on that, so I couldn't really read what was on the newspapers, so I didn't really get any of that. So I don't know how important what was said on that is, so not seeing any of that, I was able to follow everything in the movie just as easy. So, not knowing Harry Potter, you can easily go into this.
Yeah, and actually the whole, backstory via newspapers was going to be a comment of mine of, I was able to read it, but it was really quick. Even if you ignore the 3D aspect, because I'm good with 3D, even if it moves quickly, but it was hard for me to read all the headlines that they wanted me to read, because there's also kind of little Easter eggs and little ads in the newspaper and stuff, so you're trying to get all this information, but the thing that they want to show you in the explanation is just going by so fast. And I remember I leaned over because I'm like, okay, this is going to be apparently critical to this movie that he has to know, is Grindelwald is sort of the evil wizard of the world before Voldemort. So a bunch of the newspaper headlines were like, Grindelwald terrorizes Europe and all this stuff. So I'm like, okay, he's going to need to know who that is. And it does come up in the movie. And I would say how it fits into the overall Harry Potter canon. I think it's an interesting experiment because this is the first movie that's not immediately based on the book. So they did obviously release this as a screenplay in book form, but it's obviously not adapted from anything that we would have read beforehand. So what really makes Harry Potter and some other movies adapted from other source material great is this character and you're just waiting to see them come to life, whereas Newt Scamander, we only know his name in passing. We know nothing about him. And so this is kind of starting from scratch, which is a new thing for this franchise. And I think it overall really pulls it off. I mean, they have enough little winks and they use enough of the same words that Harry Potter fans will feel at home in the universe. I like the set. I like the, costuming. I like that it's the 1920s. It's, a genre that we've seen in movies kind of like recently, but it's refreshing to see them use magic for everyday things, but their everyday things are typewriters now.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten to mention sort of in my little summary that there's this family of sort of, I'm gonna say evangelical religious nut jobs. I'm sure that's the analogy that they're kind of going for, although they don't expressly say anything one way about religion, but they're out there sort of saying that wizards and witches are real and they're causing all this damage around the city, and they're trying to get the muggle world to wake up and realize what a threat they are, and you can tell that even though they're the B story, something's very important going on with them. And how did you feel about that comparison to kind of heavily religious families and things like that? Because it's kind of like a little cult she has, and she has these adopted children, and she's brainwashing them and all this stuff.
At first, it kind of felt out of place, because when you're first introduced to them, Newt is just kind of walking around New York, and he happens upon one of her kind of preachy sermon things on the steps of a bank, and you're just this is a little odd. But as it gets more into it and actually starts involving it more, you're okay, I can see that this is clearly going to be an important bit.
Yeah, they keep coming back to them, so there's got to be a reason they keep doing this.
Yeah. And
I feel like a lot of it overall felt a little padded for me, especially they're trying to, what's happening in the movie is there's this unseen sort of force that's ripping through the streets and tearing up bricks and cars and demolishing buildings and all this stuff. So they think it's some sort of beast that's running wild. So the wizards and witches are all looking for it. And this, crazy lady is saying, oh, it's the witches and wizards who are doing it. And it's, the big mystery of the movie is, what is this thing? And I feel obviously you need a driving force of the plot, but I feel we don't get to meet Newt very much. It's not his story.
Yeah, he seems more like a player in a cast of characters rather than it's about him.
Mm-hmm. He sort of stumbles on this, thing that's already happening, and it seems like he sort of knows all the answers to fix a lot of situations. It seems really oh, I have a beast that can change the weather, and I'll just use that now because it's convenient. And it just seems oh, you need something? I have a beast that does that. He just pulls it out of his little suitcase.
Yeah.
So a lot of it seemed oh, isn't that convenient to me? And I don't know how I feel about that. They make a joke, they say the title in the movie. It's sort of at the end, and he's oh, I'll send you my manuscript, and she's Tina's here's a good title, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and haha, we all had a good little laugh. But it's you didn't find them in New York. I would have much rather preferred the movie where he's actually traveling around the world and meeting these creatures in their own environment, and how does he capture all these things, and how does he even know where they are or what they eat, and
Yeah, that would have been, I think, better in my opinion. Yes, this is a decent story to tell, but it doesn't really fit with the title. So, again, not knowing anything about it, just going off the title, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, New York, apparently, that's where they all are, because he brought them there. And so, you kind of learn a little bit about some of them, because in a couple scenes they actually go into the suitcase, and he has kind of a zoo, for lack of a better word, set up in his suitcase, so you kind of see, oh, these things live in plains. That guy, he lives in mountains with snow. And so you don't really learn much about the creatures, really. You learn a bit about some of them, one expands or contracts to fit the size of whatever room they're in. and that's all you learn about that thing. Oh, and then this thing, it mates by doing this thing, and that's okay, but you don't really learn much about many beasts.
And I guess that would probably make for a more literal yet probably boring story. I guess you need an overarching threat or something that happens. So this is clearly setting up for more movies to follow. As I mentioned, with Grindelwald, the evil wizard, he kind of comes in at the end, and we find out that a lot of this bad doing is either caused by him or antagonized by him. It's really interesting. Okay, we should have probably issued this long ago, but spoiler warning, we're gonna ruin everything.
Yeah.
We seem to be kind of tiptoeing a lot of some finer points, but let's just go out and ruin it.
All right.
So Colin Farrell, and I can't remember his character's name, Mr.
Graves.
something. Graves. But Colin Farrell is this like magical policeman, and he's going around and he's trying to like figure out what this big thing is that's killing, like, has it killed anybody? I don't know. Yes, it does. It kills.
Yes.
But it's like destroying the world and killing people. He's trying to figure out what it is. And one of these like cult kids turns out to be a wizard. And when you suppress your wizarding feelings and you like hate yourself and you bury it deep down, it apparently creates a creature that can destroy a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So Colin Farrell finds this kid and kind of is a big jerk to him because he thinks it's like one of the other kids, but it's this like sketchy emo kid. and then the emo kid turns out to be this monster. But it's the monster lives inside him. It's not the actual kid. But anyway, so at the final battle, the kid is turning into this monster, and he's like, no, wait, like, you know, I'm your friend and I'll try to help you, and you know, you can be a great wizard. I always knew you were a great wizard. And like 10 minutes before, he's like, you're useless to me. And he just seems to flip-flop between like good guy and bad guy. And when you first see him talking to the kid, you're like, okay, he's like trying to get this information. He had like a prophecy that him and this kid will find the solution to the problem. And then he's like a complete dick to him for no reason, really. Like, oh, you're useless to me now. I promised you a happy life, and you're used to living in garbage. And oh, guess what? Back to the garbage with you. And then he turns into this big monster, and he's trying to reason with him. And it's just like, and then the other magical policemen end up killing the kid because they want to kill the monster, so they have to kill them kind of together. And then Colin Farrell's like, no, how could you do that? I was trying to save him. And then he turns into Grindelwald, the evil wizard, played by Johnny Depp, which, oh my God. But, so, are you good? Are you bad? Were you, like, trying to make him the monster? Were you trying to stop the monster? Like, I don't get his motivation.
Yeah, it was really out of place. Like, there was no indication that he was Grindelwald until, like, the last 5 minutes of the movie. And it's just, like, right out of left field. Because there's no lead up to it. It's just, okay, you're kind of a dick but in one scene, but then, okay, I can see your reasoning behind that in another, and then, okay, he's a dick again for this reason, and that makes sense. But then at the end, it's like, oh, I'm actually the bad guy. And you're like, what? What? When did you become the bad guy? There's no reason for you being the bad guy. It's like they just had to have Grindelwald in there for some reason to set up for some other thing later on.
Yeah, and at the very end, it's Newt who basically comes up to him and like points his wand. He's like, reveal yourself. And then he turns into Grindelwald. And it's like, how did Newt even know? Like, they all think this guy's Europe. He's basically like, as much as Voldemort was Hitler, apparently like this guy's supposed to be like the previous Hitler. I don't know. But like, how did Newt even know? Like, you're right, there were no clues. I mean, they talk about Grindelwald and they're saying that he's, you know, his goal is to like expose the magical world and start a war with the Muggles, and to what end, I don't really know. He's just evil. I don't know. And that it just didn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's very much they only had him there so that in the next movie he can escape. That's what the next movie's going to be. It's going to be him escaping, and oh no, we got to go track him down. And that's like, there was no reason for him being in there. Like, they could have just had Colin Farrell be the bad guy to just be a bad guy. that didn't have to be the overarching bad guy. You could have just made him a sympathizer of Grindelwald, and he was trying to undermine this kid. Maybe he figured it out, so he's trying to purposely be horrible to this kid to make it worse, or something like that. Like, they could have just made him, using an analogy, could have just made him a Nazi Party member rather than Hitler himself.
Yeah. And there's a few, like, things in there that I'm like, that's just not a reasonable reaction that anyone would take. So, you know, the city's kind of on lockdown. They think that all these beasts are running wild and causing this damage. So Tina, who works at the ministry, finds Newt with magical creatures, and they have accidentally gotten out, and she takes him back to be arrested. And they arrest her for, like, sympathizing with him. And granted, she put him up in her apartment for one night and then took him in. But, like, they're sentencing her to death. Like, they're putting them both to death. And it's like, she works for you. Like, I don't understand how it... And, A, there's no trial. Just Colin Farrell says, oh, time to die. And you're all going to this big acid pit. Like, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like, she literally brought him in to be, like, prosecuted. Why are you getting her, too? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah. Like, she had even, like, tried to bring him in before, and the others were just like, get the hell out of here. What are you doing here? We're trying to have a meeting. Not just, hey, go sit over there for 5 minutes when we finish up, then we'll talk. It was just, leave us alone, you stupid person. You're not supposed to be in this room anymore. You're not one of us. And it's just really odd. Like, if they had just, like, given her, like, 5 minutes of time, half the stuff could have been avoided in the movie. Like, his stuff wouldn't have escaped, and then everything would be fine. Well, not really, because there's stuff going on before that, but all the escaped beasts wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Basically, it's a lot of just, like, non sequiturs. Just why would you think to do that? Or even, you know, part of the point is she's, you know, not in their little investigator club anymore. She's not an Auror, and she got, like, demoted. And as far as I could understand just from the movie, she was talking to this, you know, emo kid who turns out to be the monster, and she, like, saves him from the abusive, like, cult leader mother, and then she gets demoted for it. I don't really get it. I guess she had to use magic to stop her, so she was exposing herself or something, but it's like, okay. It wasn't made very clear.
Yeah, there was kind of like a flashback thing in the, like, acid pool. Like, you know how in the Harry Potters, Dumbledore had that, like, cistern thing that you could take out a memory and put it in there and then view it? I can't remember what that was called. But
Pensive.
Sure. It was kind of like that, but instead of just being, like, fancy, nice-looking water, it was acid. And so it played you a happy memory as you're being dunked into this as your death sentence, rather than just using some, like, killing magic spell. They had to get all elaborate with this slowly floating down chair into a pit of lava. Like,
the James Bond style of death machine.
Exactly. Like, surely they could have come up with something faster than that. Like, even if they still wanted to go with the chair going into acid, they could have sped up the chair a bit. Like, it was going, like, a quarter mile an hour. It was like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna sit here and wait to die in acid for 25 minutes. Just get it over with.
I don't know where in sort of the magical, you know, lore this happened, but I mean, you have a killing curse. It's called Avada Kedavra. Maybe, like, you know, death sentences, you can license specific sanctioned government officials to perform it in terms of executions. Like, you have a thing that will kill someone instantly. You don't need to go through the dunking in acid.
Maybe, this is kind of just, like, really spitballing, but in future movies, Grindelwald will use that, and they'll set up, like, a Wizard UN and, like, Wizard Geneva convention, and that's when the, like, Killing Curse and Cruciato, or whatever those other ones, all get banned, or something like that.
Well, then they could have used it here, but like I said, I don't know where in the world it was banned, but... like, there's got to be easier ways to kill people. I mean, you don't need the acid or, like, sharks with laser beams on their heads. You can just do it.
Yeah.
So since this movie is also called Fantastic Beasts, do you feel like the beasts were fantastical?
Some of them. Other ones looked really janky, in my opinion.
Janky.
Janky.
Please define that word for those who are not hip with the lingo.
They didn't look good at all, in my opinion, some of them. Like, the platypus thing, that looked really bad. It
looked like just like a platypus.
Exactly. It was like, hey, here's a platypus that likes to steal money. It just looked really bad sometimes. Like, especially, like, there was, like, the expanding and contracting blue snake things. The CGI, when they were holding them, looked really bad, in my opinion. Like, some of the CG, I didn't like at all. Like, when they went to, like, that underground club, and there was, like, the lounge singing goblin lady, that looked really bad.
Yeah.
The CGI on the Narlac guy, like the goblin they went to that club to talk with, looked really bad. And some of the things they could have used practical effects for, like the goblins. Like, they used practical effects for the goblins in Gringotts in the original Harry Potter, but they decided to go with CG for these ones. Maybe just because they want to use Ron Perlman for his voice, but...
I mean, why wouldn't you? You would use any excuse to try to get Ron Perlman in your movie.
I know, but you could just overdub. Like, you're just recording him either way. You could just put it over somebody else's already made-up face that you wouldn't recognize them anyway. And
my thing with the lounge singer is, like, they animate side boob on her. Like, she's this goblin, and she's doing this sexy dance, and she has all this cleavage, and I'm like, who is this for?
Also, she doesn't look like any other goblin that they'd already had. Like,
because they have to make her sexy, you see.
I know, but, like, her skull was, like, elongated, like the alien from the Aliens movies. Like, it was just really long for no reason, and none of the other goblins that you had ever seen looked anything like that. It was just completely different.
Yeah, I do agree. Some of the CG was a little rough when they're handling things. Like, it's got to be the hardest part is, there isn't actually a beast there. It's probably like a green tennis ball or something that they're just holding as a placeholder. So I'm willing to forgive it. Like, I did notice it, but it wasn't a deal breaker for me.
Yeah.
But I think the creature design that really got me, again, I can't remember any of their names, but like the rhinoceros thing that's just like in mating season that's trying to like hump the poor muggle guy, like poor guy.
Yeah, like, and what the hell was up with that? It looked so stupid. It was like, okay, let's get a real life creature and then just mess with it. Like, see what we can do to just make it really weird. How about we make it like 50 feet tall with a giant bulbous head that glows in the dark? And you're just like, what? That doesn't make any sense at all.
Also known as the Pokemon School of Creature Design. Oh, look, an ice cream cone. It's a monster now.
Yeah, I think one thing that I didn't like about the creature design was that, yes, there's some, like, creatures and stuff in the original Harry Potters, but a lot of it is already based off pre-made things, like centaurs. They were already a thing. Like, stuff like that. Like, they had it more like things that have been around, whereas all this needed to be original things, and the original ideas sucked. Like, the platypus thing, it was just like, okay, let's make a platypus without the platypus tail, so it looks kind of like a mole, and then the special thing about it is money. It collects money, that's what it does. And then they're like, okay, let's get a flying snake. Okay, what can the flying snake do? Oh, I know, it can expand. Yes, go for it. It was just kind of odd.
To be fair, though, most of those creatures have been name-dropped in Harry Potter before. So, like, Niffler, which is what the, like, platypus sort of echidna-looking thing is, it had been mentioned by name in Harry Potter. I can't remember if there was a description or anything to go with it, but most of those beasts did already have a name. So she would have like had sort of an idea of what they did before. It's not like they had to make it up just for this production, but most of them are sort of inventions of Rowling, I guess.
Yeah. The one creature that I did like the looks of was the griffin, I guess it was. Like the
Thunderbird at the end.
Sure. Yeah. It actually looked good. The rest were all just okay. Except for the rhino thing, that was stupid.
It sounds like we have a lot of negative comments about this movie. Maybe I feel like I liked it less than I actually do. But one other thing I wanted to touch on is the romantic relationships in the movie. So I know last week when we talked about Doctor Strange, I really liked that relationship and I felt it was believable. And here we have sort of two offerings for romantic relationships. So there's Newt and Tina, and then there's also Jacob and Queenie. So one of those I liked, one of those I did not like. I bet it's not hard to guess which one. So Jacob, who is our Muggle friend, and Queenie, who is the sort of kind of ditzy, but more like spacey telepathy witch. So I actually thought they were kind of cute. Like, you know, she can read his mind, and one of the lines is like, "Oh, don't worry, honey. Like, everybody thinks that when they first see me and stuff." And, you know, I got a little laugh, like, haha. But, you know, she actually seems like legitimately sweet, and so does he. And I don't know, like, I feel like I could see it working in the future.
I feel the same way. Like, that relationship actually is good. Like, it's not super forced like other ones. And also, it lends itself because in America, the way that the Wizarding world and the Muggle world are separated is very different than it is in the UK, where Newt's from. In America, the Wizards and the No-Mages, which is the American version of Muggle, are not to interact at all. They're not supposed to use any magic in front of them, which is the same in the UK, but they're not allowed to fraternize with them, and they certainly aren't allowed to have any relationships with them. And so I think that lends itself well to the Queenie and Jacob relationship, is that not only does the relationship make sense, it also crosses that boundary that's been set up. Whereas with Newt and Tina, that one just seems really forced, like every movie relationship ever.
And I think it's partially because we don't really get a lot of character development from Newt, or really many of the characters except, I guess, Jacob. Because Newt, we just see him, we meet him, he's just, you know, fresh off the boat to New York City, and his creatures get loose, and his motivation is get the creatures and go on his merry way. Like, he has no stakes in any of this, and we don't really learn much about him, except he was, like, shy, and they hint at, you know, a former relationship with one of the Lestrange family members, who, again, anyone familiar with Harry Potter, that name puts up some red flags. But Newt doesn't really get a lot of character development, and then, especially because we haven't really grown to like him as much, I don't see how Tina can. Like, the whole movie, she's trying to chase him down to bring him into the police to get arrested. And then when we're at the end of the movie and he's getting on the boat back to England, she's literally crying that he's leaving. I'm like, you were going to turn him into the cops like 2 days ago and never see him again because he'll be in jail. Like, there's nothing that he did to make her love him except, like, save her life. But even then, like, you don't have to love the first guy that saves your life, honey. Like, just wait.
Yeah, it was another one of those, hey, we've met for a week and now I love you type deals. It's one of those forced movie relationships that just doesn't need to be there. Like, if you want to feature her in the next movie, yeah, maybe have it then. Like, hint at it in the first one, like, have them being, like, close friends, but and end with a hug, rather than, like, hey, I love you, please come back to America sometime. It irks me sometimes.
I agree, and especially since Harry Potter, since it was over so many books and so many years, the characters did form different relationships, and it was really like a who's going to end up with who at the end of the book. And even Harry dates another girl before he ends up with Ginny, and you know, Ron and Hermione end up together, which everyone was like, "What?"
Yeah.
So it's like there's the time for that. Like maybe they're worried they're not going to get another movie, so they just crammed it all in. But it didn't need to be. Look, you've established that there's trust, there's friendship. Like say goodbye and leave it at that. You didn't need to go so heavy-handed on it at the end.
Yeah. Another thing about the Queenie Jacob relationship is that at the end of all the events, they obliviate basically all the Muggles in New York, and unfortunately, this includes Jacob. And the reason that Jacob and Newt meet in the first place is that Jacob was going to the bank to get a loan to open up a bakery. Unfortunately, he gets turned down, but later in the movie you see Newt give him some valuables, which is enough to open the bakery. And Queenie goes to the bakery, and there's that look in their eyes that, yes, this can still work out now that Jacob had been obliviated, because in the bakery, he was designing baked goods that looked like the creatures he saw before he got obliviated, so you're like, maybe he wasn't completely obliviated.
He obviously remembers something, and
Yeah.
the final shot is like him looking at her and getting this huge smile on his face, like he remembers who she is, and so I definitely like their relationship a lot better. Like it wasn't forced. She was flirtatious with him, but then you see her flirt with other guys to kind of like manipulate them, but she flirts with Jacob because she actually likes him, and you can tell that difference.
Yeah.
Whereas I didn't see any flirting going on with Tina and Newt, like zero.
Yeah. Also, like, every time Newt interacts with anybody, he just looks so awkward. Like, he never looks anybody in the eyes. He's always kind of like talking out the side of his mouth. Like, he's never really direct with people, except for like
He shuffle runs, he like hunches over and runs. It's really
yeah,
funny.
he just seems like the most awkward person ever. Now, I don't know if that was completely intentional, like if he's supposed to like they kind of have references to him in school and his older brother being like this hero and all this stuff, and oh, he's just his little brother and stuff like that. So it could be that they just want him to kind of be less than confident in the first one and then grow into himself in future ones as he progresses on his book and stuff like that, and becomes well known, since his book becomes a really well-known textbook and stuff like that. But he was just so awkward all the time.
For sure. And how do you feel about the casting? Like, do you think that they all seemed like appropriate?
I think they were decent. One thing is they have more leeway with it because it's not based on source material. So if they needed to adapt a character to fit more with the actor, they could. Whereas with Harry Potter, it was like, okay, we already have descriptions of everybody, so actors need to at least somewhat match this. Whereas with this, they could get away with it a lot more since they were all brand new characters. You didn't have any preconceived ideas about them. But I think everybody did a pretty good job. I liked Colin Farrell as Graves. I think he was good. I really liked the guy that played Credence, the cult kid. His name's Ezra Miller, and I thought he did a pretty good job.
He's the Flash.
Oh, is he?
I had to look that up after. Yes.
Did not know that. I just have the
He's-
IMDb page open, so I know character names and who played them.
And I largely agree. I think Eddie Redmayne did a good job as Newt, and I'm sure that all those shy and mumbling and stuff were choices. I feel like sometimes he mumbled a little too much and I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I think overall he did a good job. Same thing with the rest of sort of the four main casts. I think they were all pretty good. Tina, I don't know. It's a new character. She's kind of forgettable in the first place, and we're supposed to connect with her because she was like, she's a little quirky and she's a little bit of an outsider too, and then she gets kicked out of her old job and stuff, and you know, I didn't jive with her yet. We'll see how it goes in the next one. I too really liked Colin Farrell. I was like waiting for him to be the bad guy, but then he would still kind of do something good and then be bad guy again. I'm like, I couldn't get a read. The thing that bugged me that seemed like stunt casting was Johnny Depp. So the very end when it's revealed that Colin Farrell Graves is actually Grindelwald, and then he turns into Johnny Depp, I was just like, what? Like the last little while, I'm sorry, Johnny Depp, but you've been box office poison. And I know that they just sneaked you in here. And I feel like I remember seeing some news article about him being in this movie, but I'd forgotten. It wasn't like I was waiting for him to pop up. But it just seemed like, really? Like, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. I think my favorite character was Jacob. He just seemed like the most sincere in all his actions. Like, I don't think that's a really good way to describe it, but everything he did, it's not like there was some ulterior motive to it. He was just kind of going with the flow, and of course he's supposed to also be like the comic relief as well, and I liked him.
Yeah, and it's easy to relate to the comic relief. I agree. I think he did a good job. Like, of the cast, he's sort of the self-projection character. Like, we're learning about this world as Jacob's learning about this world, so that's who we're kind of supposed to root for and sort of be connected with, I would think, more than you were with Newt. But I think overall they did a good job. I do miss a little bit when they were casting Harry Potter movies, J.K. Rowling made a rule that only like British actors could be in it. So, all these like famous American actors obviously wanted to be in like one of the biggest movie franchises of all time, but it had to be UK only, and like where possible, like using, especially the child actors, like unknown kind of actors. So I almost missed that. Like, I didn't find Colin Farrell distracting, and I didn't really find Eddie Redmayne distracting. I guess he's kind of, he's won an Oscar, so I guess he's famous now. But I liked that most of the others were kind of unknowns, or they aren't like big in other stuff. Like, it's keeping with it. And then it's just the Johnny Depp thing just ruined it. Like, it just ruined it for me.
Yeah. Like, the only, like, I don't know what else Eddie Redmayne's been in, but the only other actor that I recognized, other than Colin Farrell and Eddie Redmayne, was Jon Voight. And I know he's not, like, really big actor or anything, but he's the only other one that I actually recognized from other things. Like, I'm just scrolling through the list of who was in it, and other than, like, Ron Perlman's voice as the Narlac or whatever his name was, that was the only other person I recognized. So, like, yeah, it was more unknown people. I think that was good.
Mm-hmm. And there's one actor that as soon as we left the movie theater, I was like, look up who played him. Because it was one of the, you're sitting in a movie and you're staring at the guy and you're like, I know him from somewhere, but I can't figure it out. And it's Ronan Rafferty, who plays Langdon Shaw, which frankly, all the whole Shaw subplot where they're like, the whole Jon Voight, like, they could kind of be cut. Like, they don't really need to be in there.
Yeah.
But Ronan Rafferty is in Moon Boy, which I love and which is hilarious. And I'm glad that, like, that little thought was put to rest. It didn't drive me crazy the rest of the night. And I think the most petty complaint I will say for the end, which I feel like we're coming to, the word no-maj. Like, it just, that was one of the only things I sort of read about it when the movie was being like announced and produced, of like, there's this new world, it's going to be in America, and there's going to be a new like wizarding school and all this stuff. There's going to be a new spin-off, and the word for muggle there is no-maj. I'm like, is this supposed to be some sort of commentary on like Americans aren't creative or something? They can't, like, he has no magic, what are we going to call him? A no-maj. I just, like, at that point I'd already given up on the movie before it was even filmed.
Yeah, the thing I don't get about that is, like, yes, I'd understand that there'd be differences between European and American witches and wizards, but the American ones would have descended from European ones to begin with. So I'd assume that the European wizards and witches had been using the word muggle for a very long time, and then suddenly, once they go over to America, they're like, you know what? Muggle's so old-fashioned. Let's come up with something new. Because it's not like they have different spells and stuff like that. Like, all that other stuff is the same as all the magic in the Harry Potter movies, but they're just like, okay, there's this one thing that we're gonna change, and that was it. It was just, no mage. Haha, that's good. And it's just so weird.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I get that, even the argument, like, Canada, where we're from, or America, we were settled by Britain, but we don't use a lot of British slang anymore. Like, I get that slang changes, but you're right. It's the only thing that's different. All the spell names are the same. Like, it's just so funny that that's the one word they picked that's different, and I feel like it's the least creative thing in the world.
Another thing, I'm not sure if in the Harry Potter stuff, the segregation has always been people with magic and people without magic. But in the US in the 20s, there would have been a lot of racism as well. But the president of, like, the US Magic Council thing was black. And I don't know if racism is prevalent in the wizarding world, but based on it being in the US in the 20s, you would think there might be some as well.
So I actually heard a different podcaster who was talking about Harry Potter. He's English, and coming to America, he noticed a big change. Like, obviously, there's racism everywhere, but he said, coming from England, it's mostly classism. So I'm sure I don't know the exact situation. I would interpret that, minorities are probably tend to be in a lower class, but it's not because they're minorities, it's because of the class. And going to America, it is entirely because of race, and like the race has kind of dictated the class. Like, it's kind of the other way around. So this guy was saying that he was so used to the classism in the UK, and then coming to America and seeing the racism, it was completely different. So maybe it just kept that British sentiment when they were writing it or casting it, that like the wizarding world keeps this classism, because the Harry Potter, it's all about like your bloodlines, like Voldemort's thing, and like, Slytherin and all that stuff. It's like, are you pure blood? It doesn't matter what race you are per se, as long as your whole history is pure blood. So maybe it's something like that.
Yeah. It was just kind of one thing that stood out in my mind, that it's the 20s, but there's absolutely no racism in the wizarding world. But maybe there is, maybe they just weren't showing anything. But it just seemed odd that, one, the president was a woman in the 20s, but even odder that she was a black woman in the 20s, and it was just kind of odd.
I do agree. That did stand out to me. Like, oh, that's interesting. But I think it's okay. And if you look at the Muggles, like the Muggle cast and like the extras and crowd scenes, I feel like they were like all white. I don't recall any like non-Caucasian Muggle in this world. I could be wrong. I could just not be remembering it, but nothing stands out to me, especially like how, she does. And even the other wizards, like I'm trying to think of another sort of minority wizard.
There were a few of the Aurors at the end in like the subway station scene that were not Caucasian as well, but again, those were kind of just like extras, for lack of a better, because they had no speaking lines, but there were a few non-white wizards as well.
Okay, so they're doing a little better on the racial integration. So I think I've talked myself into liking the movie a little less than I feel like I did. I think it's a good entry. I'm excited to sort of see where it goes. I hope they do make a second one because I have a lot of questions that need answered.
Yes, they are making a second one, and it's currently in pre-production, and it's probably going to be out in 2018. Just looking at Eddie Redmayne's IMDb page, it lists it, so.
Ah, excellent. So my questions will hopefully be answered.
We'll see.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this week. Again, if anyone has any feedback or comments, we would be glad to hear it. Our Twitter for the show is @_and_whatnot. You can also find our personal Twitters in there as well. And please like, share, and subscribe anywhere that you get your podcasts. We are now on iTunes, which is probably the easiest carrier. I know that's the one I use. So if you like what we're saying, please leave us a comment.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next episode.
Bye.